Do you remember Johnny Depp? The man who made millions laugh while secretly documenting bruises, swallowing pills alone in hotel rooms, and drowning in a storm of accusations that push him to the edge of oblivion. But even more shocking, hidden recordings and unreleased photos reveal a truth far darker than the headlines ever dared to show. How could a global icon adored by generations end up fighting for sanity, his career, and his life? Rare photos and untold secrets will be revealed in this video. Stay until the end to understand why Johnny Depp remains one of Hollywood's most admired and most tragic figures. He was not born into fame nor into light. Johnny Depp entered the world on June 9, 1963 in Owensboro, Kentucky, far from the glittering stages that would one day echo his name. His childhood was not filled with dreams of acting, but with the sound of slammed doors, broken dishes, and a mother whose anger could turn a house into a battlefield. Betty Sue Palmer, a waitress with sharp eyes and a volcanic temper, ruled the family with fear more than affection. Some days she was tender. Most days she was thunder. Johnny never knew which version of her would greet him when he walked through the door. His father, John Christopher Depp, tried to keep peace, absorbing the blows, emotional and physical, that Betty unleashed. But the walls of their small home witnessed far more than any child should ever see. Johnny remembered hiding in corners, holding his breath as the shouting escalated. He watched his mother hurl objects, curse words, and bitterness at the man who loved her. And when the storm finally broke, the silence felt even worse. A silence filled with shame and fear. By the age of 7, Johnny had already lived in more houses than most adults. The family moved constantly from Kentucky to Florida, never settling long enough to grow roots. He said later in interviews that he always felt like the new kid, the outsider, the one who arrived too late and left too soon. This rootlessness became the seed of his lifelong rebellion. If he could not belong anywhere, then he would belong to no one. But pain rarely stays silent forever. At 12 years old, Johnny discovered cigarettes, then alcohol, then drugs. Not for pleasure, but for escape. Each substance dulled the noise at home. Each high blurred the sharp edges of his mother's rage. It was a beginning of a dangerous pattern. Whenever life hurt too deeply, he numbed it. Then came the moment that shattered whatever stability he had left. When Johnny was 15, his father walked out quietly without warning. No dramatic farewell, no final speech. He simply left. Johnny was the one who found his mother collapsed from heartbreak. He watched her retreat into depression, into the very darkness she had once inflicted on others. And in a cruel twist of fate, Johnny became the emotional caretaker of the woman who had caused him so much pain. Years later, he would describe his mother as the meanest person he'd ever met. Yet, he also loved her fiercely because children don't choose what their hearts cling to. This contradiction, love and resentment intertwined, followed him throughout adulthood, shaping every relationship he ever had. But amid the chaos, one small flame survived. Music. A second-hand guitar became his refuge. In a room full of broken rules and broken promises, strings and sound were the only things that didn't hurt him. Johnny practiced for hours, sometimes until his fingers bled. The guitar didn't shout. It didn't judge. It didn't leave. This was the boy behind the legend. A child running from violence, searching for meaning, holding on to melodies to drown out the memory of slammed doors. And this boy was about to step into a new world. One that promised freedom, fame, and reinvention. But as we will soon see, the demons he carried from childhood would follow him into every stage, every film set, and every relationship, shaping the man he would become. Music was supposed to be his escape, not acting, not Hollywood, not fame. At 16, Johnny Depp dropped out of school and threw himself into music with the desperation of someone trying to outrun his own past. His band, The Kids, played in smoky bars, garages soaked in beer, and half-lit clubs where dreams tended to die quickly. But for Johnny, every stage, no matter how small, felt like freedom. He slept on couches, shared cheap motel with bandmates, and counted coins to buy gas for their van. There were no promises, no guarantees, no safety nets, only guitars, amplifiers, and the belief that music might be the doorway to a life that didn't hurt. But when the band moved to Los Angeles in the early 1980s, the city greeted them with a brutal truth. Talent was everywhere. Money was nowhere. Johnny washed dishes, sold pens over the phone, and took any odd job he could find survive. There were nights he ate only once. Days he wondered if he had made the biggest mistake in his life. Los Angeles had a way of chewing up young dreamers, and Johnny was dangerously close to being another forgotten name. Then, an unexpected door opened. A friend, Nicolas Cage, noticed Johnny's unusual presence, his quiet intensity, the pain in his eyes that made him look older than his age. Cage suggested something outrageous. Try acting, Johnny protested. He wasn't an actor. He didn't belong in front of cameras, but desperation can make a person brave. So, he walked into his first audition, nervous, uncertain, and completely unaware that his life was about to transform. In 1984, he landed a role in A Nightmare on Elm Street. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't heroic. His character was literally pulled into a bed and eaten by a monster, but it was a start. A new path, a crack of light in a long corridor he had been wandering through for years. As cast and director began to notice him, they saw something different, something unpolished, raw, and deeply human. Johnny Depp didn't act like Hollywood actors. He moved like a musician. He carried himself like someone who had lived a life far beyond his years. Then came the turning point. 21 Jump Street. The TV series turned him into a national heartthrob. Posters of him plastered the walls of teenage bedrooms across America. Girls screamed his name. Studios saw him as the next perfect idol. But Johnny hated it. The world saw a handsome young star. He saw a prison. He never wanted to be a pretty face. He wanted to disappear into characters, not be worshipped for his looks. The more famous he became, the more he rebelled. He rejected roles that were safe. He turned down movies that would have made him rich. He searched for strange characters, misunderstood souls, people who felt as broken as he once was. Johnny Depp was not chasing fame. He was chasing himself. And soon that search would lead him into the hands of a visionary director, a man who would become both collaborator and mirror to Johnny's inner world, Tim Burton. Success didn't come gently to Johnny Depp. It arrived at a spotlight, sudden, blinding, and impossible to escape. When he stepped into Edward Scissorhands in 1990, everything changed. The film wasn't just a role. It was a mirror. A lonely outsider with blades for hands, longing for connection, but destined to hurt anything he touched. Johnny understood that pain instinctively. He didn't need to invent emotion. He simply opened old wounds and let them bleed on screen. Tim Burton saw what Hollywood had missed. Johnny wasn't a heartthrob. He was a character actor trapped in the body of a matinee idol. The partnership between Depp and Burton shaped an entire era of cinema. Ed Wood, Sleepy Hollow, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Sweeney Todd. Each film peeled back another layer of the strange, brilliant mind that audiences couldn't quite grasp. Johnny became the face of the beautifully bizarre. No role was too eccentric, no transformation too extreme. Then came the turning point that would define his global legacy, Captain Jack Sparrow. When Pirate of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, debuted in 2003, Johnny delivered something nobody expected. Not a heroic pirate, not a ruthless captain, but a staggering mischievous, unpredictable swashbuckler who moved like a drunken rock star and spoke with a slur charm that instantly became iconic. Executives were horrified. Audiences were ecstatic. The character took over pop culture. Kids imitated him. Adults memorized his lines. Theme parks rebuilt attractions around him. And Disney, once doubtful, rewarded him with a salary no actor of his generation had ever reached. By the late 2000s, Johnny was earning over $50 million for film, turning him into one of the world's highest-paid stars. From the outside, it looked like a dream. A boy from a broken home had become a legend. But fame has a way of turning triumph into illusion. Behind the curtain, the pressures were mounting. Endless interviews, global tours, paparazzi ambushes. Everyone wanted a piece of Johnny Depp. The world adored Jack Sparrow. But Johnny felt himself disappearing. The more he entertained millions, the more hollow he became. He drowned that emptiness the only way he knew how. With alcohol, liquor blurred the noise of fame just as it had once softened the violence of childhood. And while audiences saw a charismatic star, those close to him saw a man whose self-destructive habits were slowly consuming him. His relationships suffered first. The long hours, constant travel, and emotional exhaustion built invisible walls between him and the people he loved. His growing dependence on substances created unpredictable moods. Calm one moment, spiraling the next. Hollywood whispered about his volatility, though most kept silent as long as the box office stayed strong. Yet, despite the rising chaos, Johnny's performances remained magnetic. Directors admired his commitment. Co-stars adored his generosity. Fans believed he was untouchable, proof that a true icon could survive anything. But beneath the charisma, cracks were forming. Rare photos from film
sets captured the truth. A tired face behind heavy makeup. A man slumped in a chair between takes, eyes distant, a pirate costume masking the exhaustion of someone carrying ghosts no camera could see. The public, however, saw none of this. They saw the Oscar nominations, the magazine covers, the worldwide premieres. They celebrated the effortless charm, the unpredictable interviews, the playful chaos that made Johnny Depp feel like the last true rebel of Hollywood. For a while, the illusion held. But every legend carries a shadow. And Johnny's shadow, shaped by addiction, loneliness, and unresolved trauma, was growing larger each year, waiting for the moment when the world would finally see it. That moment was coming, and when it arrived, it would not only shatter his image, it would ignite one of the most public breakdowns in modern celebrity history. For years, Hollywood celebrated Johnny Depp as a genius, eccentric, magnetic, and untouchable. But behind the myth was a man unraveling in slow motion, pulled apart by addiction, heartbreak, and the weight of past wounds he never learned to heal. It began quietly. A drink after work, a drink before work, a drink to sleep, a drink to forget. Soon, it wasn't just alcohol. Pills blur the edges of loneliness. Cocaine fueled long nights that he didn't remember. The same substances he once used as a scared teenager now returned with a vengeance. This time amplified by fame and unlimited access. Those who worked with him noticed the signs: slurred speech, trembling hands, sudden mood swings, but few dare confront him. Johnny had always been a chameleon on screen. Now in private, he was becoming a ghost. His relationships carry the scars of his inner battles with Winona Ryder. He once experienced a love so intense it felt like rebirth. But intensity can turn into instability. After 4 years together, the relationship collapsed under pressure neither of them could articulate. Johnny's tattoo Winona Forever famously transformed into Wino Forever, a painful joke masking real heartbreak. Then came Kate Moss. They were beautiful, wild, unpredictable, a perfect storm. But storms don't last. Their nights blurred into arguments, jealousy, and destruction. In 1994, police were called to New York's Mark Hotel after Johnny allegedly destroyed the room during a heated incident. It was one of the first public signs that his volatility was no longer a rumor. Yet the most stable chapter of his romantic life arrived unexpectedly with French singer Vanessa Paradis. For 14 years, she grounded him. They had 2 children, Lily Rose and Jack. He described them as air and earth, the only things that gave him purpose. But even a quiet home cannot silence inner chaos. By the early 2010s, the relationship dissolved, leaving Johnny drifting once again without an anchor. And then he met Amber Heard. At first, their attraction was undeniable. But what began as passion soon turned into something far darker. Arguments escalated into screaming matches. Both sides accused the other of violence. Private texts, angry voicemails, recorded fights. Every moment of their collapsing marriage felt like another page in tragedy written long before either of them met. The world saw only fragments. Photos of bruises, voicemails soaked in rage, broken glass, smashed cabinets, hotel rooms left in ruins. Behind closed doors, the volatility was undeniable. When Amber filed for divorce in 2016 and accused Johnny of domestic abuse, the illusion of the beloved Hollywood rebel cracked wide open. Studios panicked. Public opinion shifted in seconds. Suddenly, every strange interview and every drunken moment became part of narrative he could no longer control. But what the world didn't expect was just how deep the scandal would go. Court documents reveal financial chaos. Johnny earned hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet, his spending was catastrophic. $30,000 a month online. $3 million to fire Hunter S. Thompson's ashes into the sky. Dozens of properties. Hundreds of staff members' impulsive purchases made during manic phases. His financial manager stated he was in severe distress. Johnny argued they had mismanaged his money. The truth was buried somewhere in between, tangled in addiction, pride, and betrayal. Then came the recordings and leaked audio tapes. Both Johnny and Amber sounded like people trapped in a mutually destructive cycle. Violent words, accusations, tears. Every second felt like a confession neither intended the world to hear. Rare courtroom photos showed Johnny exhausted, pale, trembling for withdrawal as he testified. His face, once synonymous with rebellion, now reflected years of emotional warfare. Hollywood reacted swiftly. Disney dropped him from the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. Warner Brothers removed him from Fantastic Beasts. Directors hesitated. Studios distanced themselves. Johnny Depp, the global superstar, had become a liability. In 2020, the UK court ruled against him, branding him in headlines with a label he vehemently rejected. Overnight, public perception shifted. Social media mocked him. Sponsors vanished. Even longtime friends retreated, uncertain where the truth lay. For the first time since childhood, Johnny was completely alone. He retreated from the world, disappearing into music studios, hotel rooms, and quiet corners of Europe. His once fiery charisma dimmed. Interviews became rare. Photographers captured glimpses of thin, fragile man struggling under the weight of a lifetime's worth of demons. What the audience didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine was that this was not the end of a story. It was a breaking point before the storm reversed direction. Because buried beneath the accusations and headlines were secrets, inconsistencies, messages, and testimonies that would eventually resurface, turning the narrative upside down. Johnny Depp had fallen as far as a man could fall in Hollywood. But the world hadn't heard the full truth yet, and when it finally surfaced, it would ignite a cultural earthquake no courtroom had ever witnessed. By 2016, the storm that had been building around Johnny Depp finally broke. It began with a death, quiet, intimate, and devastating. Betty Sue Palmer, the woman who had shaped him in chaos and pain, passed away after a long illness. For Johnny, it was not just a loss of mother. It was a sudden collapse of the most complicated relationship of his life. Anger, love, resentment, guilt, every unresolved emotion he carried since childhood rose to the surface at once. Friends noticed he became withdrawn, unfocused, and strangely weightless, as if grief had hollowed him out. And then almost immediately came the second blow. Amber Heard filed for divorce and requested a restraining order alleging domestic abuse. In a matter of hours, headlines transformed Johnny from a beloved icon into a cautionary tale. Images of bruises, emotional statements, legal filings. Each new piece fueled a narrative that seemed to grow faster if it could respond. Hollywood, ever fragile in its loyalty, began to distance itself. Studios canceled meetings. Publicists fell silent. A career built over 3 decades was suddenly hanging by a thread. The timing was merciless. Johnny was still grieving his mother, still drowning in substances, still fighting a past he had never learned to outrun. Now he was being pulled into a legal labyrinth. One where every message, every photo, every private moment will be dissected in courtrooms and on social media. In 2020, the UK trial became a spectacle. Johnny sued a British tabloid for labeling him as an abuser. But instead of clearing his name, the case opened every wound he had tried to hide. The court ruled against him. The verdict spread across the world like a stain that couldn't be washed off. The consequences were brutal. Warner Brothers asked him to step down from Fantastic Beasts. Disney quietly removed him from the next Pirates of the Caribbean. Industry insiders whispered that he was finished. He lost roles, endorsements, friends, and for a time even hope. Photos from that era show a man almost unrecognizable. Thinner, hollow-cheeked, eyes dimmed by exhaustion and shame. He toured with his band not for fame but because the stage was the only place where silence didn't swallow him whole. Yet even there he sometimes struggled to stand or lie on the music to carry him through nights where the weight of the world felt unbearable. But within this darkness something unexpected began to shift. People started asking questions. Discrepancies surfaced in testimonies. Private recordings leaked. Fans, once silent, began examining the evidence themselves, forming global communities determined to uncover the truth. What began as whispers slowly transformed into a movement. Justice for Johnny Depp spread across continents, gathering millions of voices. This wasn't vindication yet, but it was the first track of light in years. Johnny had lost nearly everything: career, reputation, stability. Yet for the first time in a long time, the tide was turning. The world had seen his fall. Now it was about to witness something far rarer. A man rising from the ruins with the truth at his back. It began not with triumph, but with a chair. A plain wooden chair in a Virginia courtroom where Johnny Depp sat quietly, hands folded, eyes lowered, waiting for the world to decide what remained of his life. The 2022 trial was unlike anything Hollywood had ever seen. Broadcast live, analyzed endlessly, every expression dissected, every testimony replayed in slow motion across millions of screens. But for Johnny, this was not theater. It was survival. For 6 weeks, he listened as private recordings, text messages, photographs, and memories, painful, intimate, humiliating, were played before strangers. He did not raise his voice. He did not lash out. He spoke with the calmness of someone who had already lived through hell long before the trial began. And something unexpected happened. The world listened. Really listened. As witnesses stepped forward, friends, former employees, medical professionals, a different picture began to emerge. A picture that contradicted years of headlines. A picture of a man who had been spiraling, yes, but who had not been a monster he was painted to be. Inside the courtroom, Johnny's demeanor surprised many. He wasn't a swaggering pirate or the playful interview personality. He was soft-spoken, vulnerable, almost fragile. Yet beneath that fragility was a quiet resilience, a refusal to let this final chapter be written without his voice. Every day, crowds of supporters gathered outside, holding signs, singing songs, leaving letters and artwork. Some traveled from other countries just to stand on the sidewalk and let him know he wasn't alone. For a man who had felt abandoned by the industry he served for decades, this loyalty was overwhelming. And then came the moment that changed everything. The verdict. Johnny Depp had been defamed. His reputation had been damaged unjustly. The jury ruled in his favor. In a hotel room overseas, thousands of miles away, Johnny received the news quietly, surrounded by musicians. Those who were with him said he didn't jump or shout, he just lowered his head, closed his eyes, and breathed for the first time in years. Not victory, relief. He later said, "The truth is all I ever wanted." And for the first time in a long time, the truth was finally audible. His rebirth wasn't return to Hollywood blockbusters. It was something gentler. Johnny returned to music, touring with Jeff Beck, playing guitar with a joy that hadn't appeared on his face in years. On stage, he looked lighter, almost weightless. The burden finally lifted. He painted. He spent time with his children. He traveled quietly without the machinery of fame following him everywhere. Offers slowly resurfaced. Directors reconsidered. France invited him to star in a new film. Festivals celebrated him again. He stepped back into the public eye not as the fallen star, but as a man who had survived a war few could imagine. Johnny Depp had been broken but not destroyed. The world now saw not just a legend but the human being underneath the scars. And in that fragile humanity, his story found its second heartbeat. Freedom didn't arrive in a burst of fireworks. It came quietly, like a man rediscovering sunlight after years underground. After the trial, Johnny Depp did not rush back into Hollywood. He didn't chase blockbuster roles, franchise deals, or the machinery of fame that had once consumed him. Instead, he retreated into a slower rhythm, one shaped by art, music, and a fragile peace he had fought so long to find. In France, he found a home that didn't demand anything from him. He painted for hours, losing himself in colors and silence. His canvases, portraits of musicians, rebels, and forgotten icons felt like letters he could never bring himself to write. Each stroke revealed something unspoken: loneliness, resilience, gratitude. On stage, he returned to a version of himself that existed long before Hollywood. A guitarist, not a celebrity, a man blending into music, letting the spotlight fall anywhere but on his face. Audiences who saw him during his European tour described an energy that felt different. Not wild, not chaotic, but strangely peaceful, as if he were reclaiming pieces of himself one core at a time. His relationship with his children deepened too. Lily Rose and Jack had lived their lives under the shadow of their father's legend and his scandals. Now, with the noise fading, Johnny devoted time to being present in ways fame had never allowed. Private photos show him laughing freely, unposed without the weight of a public persona. For a man who once believed he didn't deserve softness, these moments became a quiet form of healing. Professionally, he approached the industry with caution, not bitterness, but clarity. He accepted selective roles, choosing projects that spoke to him artistically rather than financially. Kin welcomed him back. Directors praised his discipline, his vulnerability, his renewed focus. But even with the applause returning, Johnny no longer chased validation. Surviving the past had rewritten his priorities. His legacy, however, was already set. Johnny Depp is more than character actor, more than Jack Sparrow, more than the scandals that try to define him. He represents a rare duality, a performer capable of transforming entirely on screen while remaining painfully human beneath the surface. His life is a tapestry of genius and chaos, brilliance and self-destruction, tenderness and trauma. And perhaps that is why audiences feel so connected to him, because his imperfections mirror their own. Years from now, people will remember the characters, but they will also remember the man who fought a public war for the simple right to tell his own truth. And in the quiet chapters of his life, now the truth finally belongs to him. In the end, Johnny Depp's story is not simply about rise and fall. It is about the fragile spaces in between. The moments when a man can be adored by millions yet feel completely alone. When a legend can unravel silently while the world applauds. When truth becomes the only lifeline left to hold on to. For decades, people saw the costumes, the characters, the strange magic he brought to every role. But behind each transformation was a boy who grew up learning to survive.